Caesarea Maritima was a Roman city in Judea. The city and harbour were built under Herod the Great during c. 2513 BC at the site of the Phoenician harbour of Stratonos Pyrgos. It was the provincial capital of Judea. The city was populated throughout the 1st to 6th centuries and became an important early center of Christianity, but was mostly abandoned following the Muslim invasion of 638. It was refortified by the Crusaders, and finally slighted by the Mamluks in 1265. The name Caesarea was adopted into Arabic as Caesarea. The settlement was all but abandoned in 1800. It was redeveloped into a fishing village after 1884, and into a town after 1940. In 1977 incorporated as the municipality of Caesarea within Israel's Haifa district, about halfway between the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa. The ruins of the ancient city, on the coast just about 2 kilometers south of the modern town, were excavated in the 1950s and 1960s. History. Early history. Herod built his palace on a promontory jutting out into the sea, with a decorative pool surrounded by stoas. In the year 6 BC, Caesarea became the civilian and military capital of the Judea province and the official residence of the Roman procurators and governors, Pontius Pilatus, Praefectus and Antonius Felix. In the year 30 BCE the village was awarded to Herod, who built a large port city at the site, and called it Caesarea in honor of his patron Octavian Augustus Caesar. The city transformed rapidly into a great commercial center, and by the year 6 BCE became the headquarters of the Roman government in Palestine. Since Caesarea had no rivers or springs, drinking water for the prospering Roman and Byzantine city was brought via a unique high-level aqueduct, originating at the nearby Shani Springs, some 7.5 kilometers northeast of Caesarea. Caesarea served as a base for the Roman legions who quelled the Great Revolt that erupted in 66 BCE, and it was here that the commanding general Vespasian was declared Caesar. After the destruction of Jerusalem, Caesarea became the most important city in the country. Pagans, Samaritans, Jews and Christians lived here in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. Caesarea Maritima was named in honor of Augustus Caesar. It was one of 4 Roman colonies for veterans in the Syria-Phoenicia region. The city was described in detail by the 1st century Roman Jewish historian Josephus. The city became the seat of the Roman prefect soon after its foundation. Caesarea was the administrative capital beginning in 06 AD. Josephus describes the harbour as being as large as the one at Piraeus, the major harbour of Athens. Remains of the principal buildings erected by Herod and the medieval town are still visible today, including the city walls, the castle and a Crusader cathedral and church. Caesarea grew rapidly, becoming the largest city in Judea, with an estimated population of 125,000 over an urban area of 3.7 square kilometers. In 66, the desecration of the local synagogue led to the disastrous Jewish revolt. This city is the location of the 1961 discovery of the Pilate Stone, the only archaeological item that mentions the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate, by whose order Jesus was crucified. It is likely that Pilate used it as a base, and only went to Jerusalem when needed. According to Flavius Josephus, Caesarea was the scene in AD 26 of a major act of civil disobedience to protest Pilate's order to plant eagle standards on the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. The Emperor Vespasian raised its status to that of a colonia, with the name Colonia Prima Flavia Augusta Caesarea. In AD 70, after the Jewish revolt was suppressed, games were held here to celebrate the victory of Titus. Many Jewish captives were brought to Caesarea Maritima. Cassia claims that 2,500 captives were slaughtered in gladiatorial games. After the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, Caesarea was the provincial capital of the Judea province, before the change of name to Syria Palestina in AD 134, shortly before the Bar Kokhba revolt. After the revolt of Simon Bar Kokhba in 132 AD, which ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and expulsion of Jews, Caesarea became the capital of the new Roman province of Palestina Prima. Early Christian center. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Caesarea was first introduced to Christianity by Philip the deacon, who later had a house there in which he gave hospitality to Paul the apostle. It was there that Peter the apostle came and baptized Cornelius the centurion and his household. The first time Christian baptism was conferred on Gentiles. Paul's first missionary journey. When newly converted, Paul the apostle was in danger in Jerusalem. The Christians there accompanied him to Caesarea and sent him off to his native Tarsus. He visited Caesarea between his second and third missionary journeys, and later, as mentioned, stayed several days there with Philip the deacon. Later still, he was a prisoner there for 2 years before being sent to Rome. In the 3rd century, Origen wrote his Hexapla and other exegetical and theological works while living in Caesarea. The Nicene Creed may have originated in Caesarea. As the capital of the province, Caesarea was also the metropolitan see, with ecclesiastical jurisdiction over Jerusalem. When rebuilt after the destruction in the year 70. In 451, however, the Council of Chalcedon established Jerusalem as a patriarchate, with Caesarea as the first of its 3 subordinate metropolitan sees. The Apostolic Constitution says that the first bishop of Caesarea was Zacchaeus the publican, followed by Cornelius and Theophilus. The first bishops considered historically attested are those mentioned by the early church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, himself a bishop of the see in the 4th century. He speaks of a Theophilus who was bishop in the 10th year of Commodus, of a Theoctistus, a short-lived Domnus, and of Theotechnus, and an Agapius. Among the participants in the Synod of Ancyra in 314 was a bishop of Caesarea named Agricolaus, who may have been the immediate predecessor of Eusebius, who does not mention him, or who may have been bishop of a different Caesarea. The immediate successors of Eusebius were Acacius and Gelasius of Caesarea. The latter was ousted by the semi-Arian Eusebius between 373 and 379. Lequin gives much information about all of these and about later bishops of Caesarea. Theological Library through Origen, and especially the scholarly presbyter Pamphilus of Caesarea, an avid collector of books of scripture. The theological school of Caesarea won a reputation for having the most extensive ecclesiastical library of the time, containing more than 30,000 manuscripts. Gregory Nazianzus, Basil the Great, Jerome and others came to study there. The Caesarean text type is recognized by scholars as one of the earliest New Testament types. The collections of the library suffered during the persecutions under the Emperor Diocletian, but were repaired subsequently by bishops of Caesarea. It was noted in the 6th century, but Henry Berkeley Sweet was of the opinion that it probably did not long survive the capture of Caesarea by the Saracens in 638, though a modern historian would attribute more destruction to its previous capture by the Sassanid Persians. Sebastos Harbour. When it was built in the 1st century BC, Sebastos Harbour ranked as the largest artificial harbour built in the open sea, enclosing around 100,000 square meters. King Herod built the two jetties at the harbour between 22 and 15 BC, and in 1090 BC he dedicated the city and harbour to Caesar. The pace of construction was impressive considering size and complexity. The breakwaters were made of lime and pozzolana, a type of volcanic ash, set into an underwater concrete. Herod imported over 24,000 cubic meters pozzolana from Pozzuoli, Italy, to construct the two breakwaters, the 500-meter long on the south and the 275-meter long on the north. A shipment of this size would have required at least 44 shiploads of 400 tons each. Herod also had 12,000 cubic meters of kerka quarried to make rubble and 12,000 cubic meters of slaked lime mixed with the pozzolana. Architects had to devise a way to lay the wooden forms for the placement of concrete underwater. One technique was to drive stakes into the ground to make a box and then fill it with pozzolana concrete bit by bit. However, this method required many divers to hammer the planks to the stakes underwater, and large quantities of pozzolana were necessary. Another technique was a double planking method used in the northern breakwater. On land, carpenters would construct a box with beams and frames on the inside and a watertight, double-planked wall on the outside. This double wall was built with a 23 centimeters gap between the inner and outer layer. Although the box had no bottom, it was buoyant enough to float out to sea because of the watertight space between the inner and outer walls. Once it was floated into position, pozzolana was poured into the gap between the walls and the box would sink into place on the sea floor and be staked down in the corners. The flooded inside area was then filled by divers bit by bit with pozzolana, lime mortar and kerka rubble until it rose above sea level. On the southern breakwater, barge construction was used. The southern side of Sebastos was much more exposed than the northern side, requiring sturdier breakwaters. Instead of using the double-planked method filled with rubble, the architects sank barges filled with layers of pozzolana concrete and lime sand mortar. The barges were similar to boxes without lids, and were constructed using mortise and tenon joints, the same technique used in ancient boats, to ensure they remained watertight. The barges were ballasted with 0.5 meters of pozzolana concrete and floated out to the position, with alternating layers. Pozzolana-based and lime-based concretes were hand-placed inside the barge to sink it and fill it up to the surface. At its height, Sebastos was one of the most impressive harbors of its time. It had been constructed on a coast that had no natural harbors and served as an important commercial harbor in antiquity, rivaling Cleopatra's harbor at Alexandria. Josephus wrote, although the location was generally unfavorable, contended with the difficulties so well that the solidity of the construction could not be overcome by the sea, and its beauty seemed finished off without impediment. Quote, however, there were underlying problems that led to its demise. Studies of the concrete cores of the moles have shown that the concrete was much weaker than similar pozzolana hydraulic concrete used in ancient Italian ports. For unknown reasons, the pozzolana mortar did not adhere as well to the kerka rubble as it did to other rubble types used in Italian harbors. Small but numerous holes in some of the cores also indicate that the lime was of poor quality and stripped out of the mixture by strong waves before it could set. Also, large lumps of lime were found in all 5 of the cores studied at Caesarea, which shows that the mixture was not mixed thoroughly. However, stability would not have been seriously affected if the harbor had not been constructed over a geological fault line that runs along the coast. Seismic action gradually took its toll on the breakwaters, causing them to tilt down and settle into the seabed. Also, studies of seabed deposits at Caesarea have shown that a tsunami struck the area sometime during the 1st or 2nd century CE. Although it is unknown if this tsunami simply damaged or completely destroyed the harbor, it is known that by the 6th century the harbor was unusable and today the jetties lie more than 5 meters underwater. Late antiquity. Caesarea is mentioned in the 3rd century mosaic of Rehoboth with respect to its non-Jewish population. In Byzantine times, Caesarea remained the capital, with brief interruption of Persian and Jewish conquest between 614 and 625. In the 630s, Arab Muslim armies had taken control of the region, keeping Caesarea as its administrative center. In the early 8th century, the Umayyad Caliph Sulayman transferred the seat of government of the Jinn Philistin from Caesarea to Ramla. The main church, an octagonal martyrion, was built in the 6th century and sited directly upon the podium that had supported a Roman temple, as was a widespread Christian practice. The martyrion was richly paved and surrounded by small radiating enclosures. Archaeologists have recovered some foliate capitals that included representations of the cross. The site used by Herod for his pagan temple, then reconsecrated as a church, would in time be reoccupied, this time by a mosque. An elaborate government structure contained a basilica with an apse where magistrates would have sat, for the structure was used as a hall of justice, as fragments of inscriptions detailing the fees that court clerks might claim attest. A well-preserved 6th century mosaic golden-colored glass table patterned with crosses and rosettes was found in 2005. Later history. The Byzantine Empire declined in the 7th century and Caesarea was raided by the Sassanid Persians early in that century. Then, in 638, the city, still the capital of Byzantine Palestine and an important commercial and maritime center, was taken by the Muslims, allegedly through the betrayal of a certain Yusuf, who conducted a party of troops of Muawiyah through a secret tunnel, perhaps the extensive Byzantine sewers, into the city. The Persian historian al-Baladuri, who offers the earliest Muslim account, merely states that the city was reduced. The 7th century Coptic bishop John of Nicaea mentions the horrors committed in the city of Caesarea in Palestine. Under Arab rule, the city walls remained, but within them the population dwindled and agriculture crept in among the ruins. By the 9th century there was a substantial colony of Frankish settlers established by Emperor Charlemagne to facilitate Latin pilgrimages. When Baldwin I took the city in 1101 halves, during the First Crusade, it was still very rich. A legend grew up that in this city was discovered the Holy Grail, around which so much lore accrued in the next 2 centuries. The city was strongly refortified and rebuilt by the Crusaders. A lordship was created there, as was one of the 4 archbishoprics in the kingdom. A list of 36 Latin bishops, from 1101 to 1496, has been reassembled by 19th-century historians. The most famous of these is probably Heraclius. Saladin retook the city in 1187. It was recaptured by the Crusaders in 1191, and finally lost by them in 1265. This time to the Mamluks, who ensured that there would be no more battling over the site where the harbor has silted in any way, by raising the fortifications, in line with the practice in other formerly Crusader coastal cities. The Latin Archbishopric of Caesarea in Palestina was made a Roman Catholic titular see in 1432. The Orthodox Church of Antioch and the Melkite Catholic Church also consider Caesarea a titular see. Archaeology and reconstruction. Archaeological excavations in the 1950s and 1960s uncovered remains from many periods, in particular, a complex of Crusader fortifications and a Roman theatre. Other buildings include a temple dedicated to Caesar, a hippodrome rebuilt in the 2nd century as a more conventional theatre, the Tiberium, which has a limestone block with a dedicatory inscription. This is the only archaeological find with an inscription mentioning the name Pontius Pilatus, a double aqueduct that brought water from springs at the foot of Mount Carmel, a boundary wall, and a 200 feet wide moat protecting the harbor to the south and west. The harbor was the largest on the eastern Mediterranean coast. Work directed by Robert Bull of Drew University is still in the process of publication, while more recent work in the harbor directed by Robert Holfelder *U of Colorado, John Olson of the U of Victoria, and the late Avner Rabin has been largely published. Caesarea has recently become the site of what bills itself as the world's first underwater museum, where 36 points of interest on 4 marked underwater trails through the ancient harbor can be explored by divers equipped with waterproof maps. Since 2000, the site of Caesarea Maritima is included in the tentative list of World Heritage Places of the UNESCO. Bibliography. Films Herod's Lost Tomb. In addition to examining Netz's purported find of Herod's tomb, Caesarea Maritima and most of Herod's other large projects are reconstructed in CGI.